Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sherelle. I just also want to quickly, for those of you who may or may not be familiar with either Aaron or myself and the work that we have done, also acknowledge this beautiful moment of this crossroads experience between the work that I've been blessed to do here in Orange County through the Jewish Community Foundation as their curator and large-scale culture producer. The first project when I was brought on board, I would be remiss if I didn't actually say this and acknowledge it, was to bring Sherelle to Orange County and to have 2 exhibitions of hers, to engage with many organizations across Orange County as she really kicked off this beautiful residency project and experience, which then later became a model for other projects we have been doing in Orange County, including bringing Aaron and Theater Dybbuk to Orange County. So there is this really beautiful moment of both of those experiences being bookended here for then this conversation to develop today. So it's really fun and exciting to be back with you both in this context. So thank you, Sherelle, again. Aaron, I want to kick off, and I'm sure to expand on the storytelling that I believe we will both be doing today. You and I have a long history of working together, not just in the experience in Orange County. But before we jump into that, let's dig a little deeper into the title of today's talk, the theater as thoughtful provocation. So what does provocation mean to you? What does it mean in the context of a classical theater experience? And certainly, what does it mean for the work that Theater Dybbuk does?
Great, thank you. And thanks so much for having me. I'm so thrilled to be here and to be with all of you and to be in dialogue with you. First, I appreciate the question of what does provocation mean? Because people hear that term and they probably have associations. They may think it means a certain brand of activism. They may think it means a certain way of engaging in the world. And I think when we say it, or when I say it, what it means is to provoke thought, to provoke response, to provoke deep engagement. That may lead to action. That may lead to a different way of engaging in the world. But I like to say we are not artist activists in the immediate sense, maybe in the long-term sense that we're hoping to move the world an inch of an inch of an inch, down the path. And so that's what that means. We are provoking you also into a little bit of what I like to call productive discomfort. The idea that a lot of art in the world, and this is not a criticism, it's an observation, can be about celebration, or it can be about comfort, or it can be about feeling at home and feeling welcome. Theater Dybbuk's work in general, artistically, is not about that. It's about asking you to sit in the questions that are unresolved and to sit in the various kind of complexities that are overlapping and to actually hold them and engage with them meaningfully. So that's what we mean by theater as thoughtful provocation, just to frame it. The other thing is that we purposely overwhelm our audiences, so we give them more than they think they can hold. There's a lot of text, there's a lot of history, there's a lot of movement all happening at once, and that in and of itself is a provocation, because we are saying to an audience in this world of great distraction, if you don't focus, you will miss something, and we're going to keep going. So be here now. We are provoking you to be here right now as fully as possible so that you can engage fully. So I think, Anne, what might make sense is to frame all that. I'm going to show a few images from Theater Dybbuk's work, and I'll say this before we dive in. For those who aren't familiar with our work, we've been around for about 13 years, and we operate on the belief that Jewish history is a unique entry point to look at the complexities of our world in a variety of ways, because we've been in so many places in different situations that by digging into that history, it holds a mirror up to our world today. And so we do that in a variety of ways, through shows, through workshops, through a podcast called the Dybbuk Cast, through residencies in different cities, some of which we will possibly talk about later. But I think the best bet is to pull up the PowerPoint, the presentation, and I'll just take you through a little bit of our work. So, perfect, thank you. So this obviously is just our logo, how lovely. We'll go to the first photo. This is actually from our first show 12, 13 years ago called Cave, A Dance for Lilith, that combined Lilith folklore and Hebrew goddess mythology with considerations in our world today to look at what happens when we otherize, when we push people out in some way, shape, or form. And we can go to the next photo. And as you can see, highly physical. We are dealing with the body and the ways in which we move through the world and are caught up with each other, so that we are giving the audience beauty, but we're also giving them challenge. And we can go to the next slide. And this will actually be a video that you will hear about 30 seconds of that combines Jewish text with movement. And so you'll see how we do that, how we use dance and movement and stylized movement to bring Jewish text to life. So please go ahead.
Huh?
Oh, there we go. Let's see if it'll play.
No.
It seems to be having a play issue. If you go on our website, you'll see all sorts of videos. Such things happen, technical, but this gives you a taste. So let's move on to the next slide. This is from a show early on in our history called Tefillah, or Prayer, a Translation, where we actually use the structure of a Jewish prayer service to take a long walk through history, where we literally went through thousands of years of history back to pre-monotheism to look at the ways that prayer is a vessel for holding who we've been and where we've been. So we'll go to the next. This is actually a really interesting piece. This was at Leichtag Commons in San Diego area, and Encinitas. That's a sukkah that you see the actors walking through that was built of sort of recycled materials and other things. And this was a communal engagement event that used an ancient ritual gathering called Hakel that we used as an inspiration to think about how we look at our environment and look at each other. And again, you can see musical. If you look closely, you can see all the actors are carrying shofar. We literally gathered in the hundreds of people who were there by blowing shofar and bringing everyone into the space. We'll go to the next. This is from a fascinating piece we did about 8 years ago called Exegog. Exegog is the first recorded Jewish play, 2nd century or so BCE, we can't say for sure. A diaspora Jew in Alexandria wrote the biblical Exodus story in the style of the time, meaning Greek tragedy. And we only had fragments of it. So we finished it with modern day narratives of refugees and immigrants, and every actor played Moses. So you can see that the figure in the middle wearing the mask, that's Moses in this moment. Then it got passed to another actor, and it was a way of universalizing the story. And you can also see there's a bunch of young people on stage. That was a youth choir that was in the piece that provoked us to think about the next generation. All the adult actors actually left the stage at the end, and we were left with them. So let's keep going. And I think next we had a clip, but I think we might be having clip issues. So that is fine. We will keep going. You can see the up close of the mask. In a post-COVID world, we probably wouldn't have 7 actors wear the mask in a row, but this was 2016. It was fine. All right, let's keep going. This is from a piece called Lost Tribes. And we were dealing with the stories around the lost tribes of Israel. And what we were actually proposing was that the questions of the lost tribes of Israel, which is kind of an ancient system of connected to those tribes which have disappeared from our history, we actually provoked that perhaps it was connected to questions of assimilation, and that nothing got lost, it just got changed and evolved. And so as you can see, those ropes on stage, the entire choreography was that for an hour and a half, people were tying and untying ropes and tying them around each other to kind of deal with these ideas of the ties that bind across culture and across belief system. Let's keep going. This is an example of a provocative image. This is from our piece called Hell Prepared, where we actually dealt with 16th, 17th century Italian Jewish ritual exorcism. And as you can see, there is a figure being held by tefillin. It was prop tefillin. It was not actual tefillin. And so much like in what we think of as a Christian exorcism, we were using iconography and the pieces of our rituals in order to engage in this ritual. And this really dealt with questions of isolationism. It took place in the Venice ghetto, and belonging, and the kind of ways in which those are connected and disconnected from each other. And let's keep going. Another Hell Prepared image. We surrounded the audience 360 in curtains, and there was shadow work happening all around them for the entirety of the performance. So much as I said, we purposely overwhelm the audience. Imagine in this moment, you're hearing complex dialogue about Italian Jewish history. You are watching stylized movement, and then around you, shadow imagery is happening. And you have to decide as an audience member where you're putting your focus and how you are going to lean into the happening that is occurring. All right, let's keep going. This is from our latest work. And I've got 3 images from this, and then we'll pause. This is from The Merchant of Venice Annotated, or in sooth, I know not why I am so sad. The Merchant of Venice, in sooth, I know not why I am so sad, in case you don't know, is the first line of The Merchant of Venice, that great comedy. And that's actually the first line. And so we combined The Merchant of Venice with its problematic Shylock figure, the Jewish moneylender, with Elizabethan history and news from the last 4 years to look at the ways that during times of great upheaval, we may displace our anxieties on the other. And we kind of used anti-Semitism as a vessel to think about that otherizing. And so the piece actually went from Elizabethan history all the way to Great Replacement theory. We kind of looked at that. And we also dealt with anti-Semitic tropes around money and capitalism. So by the end of the show, there was $4 million in fake $100 bills on stage. And you can actually see some of that here. We'll go to the next image. We also collaborate with not Jewish organizations as a way of reaching a diverse audience. And our ensemble is Jewish and not Jewish. And I say that because, as you can see, the first presentation of the show was in a church. It was actually First Congregational Church of Los Angeles. So imagine doing a piece about anti-Semitism, dealing with Great Replacement theory, dealing with the history of anti-Semitism and the tropes that occur inside a church space. And so you can see that here, and we'll go to the final image. This is from the touring version of the show. And so you can see how we built something that changes and how suddenly the same piece being in the void changes the way it feels. It puts you in a space of neutrality and then asks the audience to project where we might be. And so this is one of the ways we engage, is by bringing the play to different places. We present it in a way that gives the audience something else to bounce off against. And so this was a much starker experience. There wasn't the beauty of the church. You're just in a black space, and it actually creates a different emotional resonance. So thank you so much for sharing that. So that gives you a taste. The last thing I'll say is one of the ways we deal with provocation is we also offer workshops for artists and professionals. And those workshops ask people to engage with their whole selves, to learn techniques for creation, but also to learn techniques for communication. So that's the overview. Thanks, Anne.
Amazing. So one of the things that struck me in that wonderful presentation, and just sort of helping to root the conversation in the longer history of theater dybbuk, is beyond how many amazing productions you and the team have been able to create together. And I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about the fact that you are leading the work of theater dybbuk, but also it is deeply informed by actors and the full company coming together to help create each of these pieces. So beyond like the technicality of your method, I'm also wondering and was struck by themes that were repeating from the first show all the way through to The Merchant of Venice. And I'm wondering, are there big, important ideas, values that really anchor the work of theater dybbuk that you're looking for as you are picking new material, right? I was struck by multiple works dealing with anti-Semitism, dealing with otherness, right? It could be that you are a Jewish theater company and these, unfortunately, are pieces of our history and our narrative. Otherness, xenophobia, right? That what are you looking for? And is there a bigger story you're telling from the first work with Lilith all the way through to Merchant of Venice?
Great question. I think that there is this thing about, as I alluded to at the top, that because Jewish people have been in so many different places in the world, in various states of marginalization, belonging, not belonging, right? That we get to use it as a vessel to look at the ways questions of belonging, power, lack of power, visible marginalization, invisible marginalization, how those show up again and again in society, and they may have a slightly different face, but the roots may be related or the same. And so I think that is definitely one aspect. I think I'll share very honestly, I think something that shifted over the years, which is I think early on, I was really interested in universalization, right? In the world I was in, I felt like a really kind of safe diaspora Jew who felt like, well, I want to use this history to kind of talk about all the kinds of marginalization that are happening that might actually not be focused on Jewish, that Jewish is the entry point, but really we're going elsewhere. And I think that the last few years, frankly, I started to realize actually I need to acknowledge the particulars of questions of Jewish marginalization and anti-Semitism and the particulars of Jewish places in society and how then people may hear their own histories in that, whether they are Jewish or not. But I had some learning to do because of the things I started noticing in society. So I think there's been a shift that's really interesting and has caused me to do some reflection on our work and where we are headed. So I think that's my way of answering it. I will say that if there is a thread in our work, the big thread is that history is a vessel to understand who we are and where we are now, and that everything exists in a context. And if we are unaware of that context, we are probably unaware of what's really happening and what's playing on our emotional and intellectual lives. And so that is there. The other thread that keeps pulling is, and I mentioned at the top, is complexity. We are not a scholar who studied our work, who wrote a chapter on it. I loved that she used this term. She said, theater dybbuk is not interested in clarifying, it is interested in complexifying. And to me, that's the key. If you want clarity, go elsewhere. If you want to hold complexity and maybe even be left in a state of enlightened confusion, sure, come to theater dybbuk. And I mean that in the best way, that like we walk around in a state of confusion, I think, as humans. And if we can acknowledge it and have a light shined on it so that we understand it a little bit more, we might actually be more empathetic, more understanding, and more collaborative with the world around us.
I love that because I have to say, like, to me, that is such a Jewish point of view in the entire world, right? That, I mean, there's obviously
Yes.
the old joke of like two Jews and three opinions, but we actually come from this long and beautiful history of both scholarship, which I think is echoed deeply in the work and your practice, but also in being able to hold complexities, to be able to hold binaries, to be able to ask a million questions, just looking at the Talmud, and a very small fraction of the debates that are within the Talmud actually come to a formal resolution. The majority of our recorded argumentative conversationalist history is simply in the record of the conversation, including the dissenting thoughts, right? And that they hold importance and equal weight. And so, yeah, I think a little bit like what you've described, and actually thinking even about The Merchant of Venice is a little bit like studying Talmud, right? There's a lot being thrown at you. And you have to figure out how to focus in and pull out the nugget or the piece that's going to really sit with you.
Yes. So for example, just to build on that, in Merchant of Venice, which again was this 3-hour experience of hearing Elizabethan history, Shakespeare, and modern day news, we were calling it cumulative dramaturgy. Dramaturgy is kind of the shape of a play, or thinking about script development. And this idea that the accumulation of material, even if you don't catch every twist and turn, is where you're holding the truth. And Talmud in some ways works that way, right? It's the accumulation of voices that carries meaning, not the singular voice. And I think the work echoes that structure in some meaningful ways.
That's beautiful. I would also love for you to talk a little bit more about what is Jewish about what theater dybbuk does. Obviously, you pointed to the very clear things like we use Jewish history as a vessel to, but also for those who might be here, maybe not everybody is actually familiar even with your choice of name, theater dybbuk. What is a dybbuk? Where does this come from? You're pointing to a super specific play and supernatural folkloric moments. So let's open that up for everybody too.
Right. So a dybbuk, for those, or a dybbuk, depending on the way you speak, is a figure in Jewish folklore, a spirit who possesses a body to take it over, and is often viewed as a malevolent force, is actually often viewed negatively as something that needs to be exorcised. So sometimes people are like, how interesting you chose that for your company name, right? And we chose it for a few reasons. One is it was a way of acknowledging we may be doing theater that is allowing us to own the dark side and to ask questions of the underneath, and that which is hidden, or that which is not, again, held in the light. Two, the work, as you saw in some of the images, is highly physical. So the idea of being possessed by something and kind of channeling it is part of that. Three, as you talked about, there is, of course, a famous play, the Dybbuk, or Dybbuk, that is sort of considered one of the most important plays of Jewish and Yiddish theater. So we wanted to give a shout out to that and acknowledge it. And also, I'll speak frankly, because we're doing this dance of Jewish experience as an entry point to have a conversation that is holding many truths and many experiences, it was a way of cueing to a Jewish audience that we're a Jewish theater, but to a non-Jewish audience, it was provoking question or interest rather than feeling exclusive, because people who don't know what it means might not actually recognize us as a Jewish theater until they ask the question. So we were doing that for a variety of reasons. So that's where the name comes from. And I should say, because you asked about this earlier, connected to that, I mentioned that our ensemble is very diverse. We, we develop shows over 1 to 3 years per project. And every month to every 6 weeks, we have script development meetings where I am bringing in pages of both research and text, and the whole room is acting like a script consultancy, is giving responses, is asking questions. So for a 90-minute work or a 3-hour work, whatever it may be, I'm writing 300 to 500 pages of material that get winnowed down, that get carved away in consultation with a variety of people, including scholars. And so there is something, I myself, as the lead artist, am being possessed by the voices of those in the cohort who are definitely influencing the work and making sure that it is getting more and more, I almost said clear, but I just said we don't clarify, more and more complex and clear in its complexity, I should say. So that also just gives you a picture of the process.
Oftentimes your work, and correct me if I'm wrong, will include Q&As, right, at the end of your productions. Do you find that that is helpful for the audience? And if they are struggling with that clarity question that keeps kind of raising its head in this conversation?
It is helpful, I think, largely as a place for the audience to hear their own voices reflected back to them. And I don't mean that dismissively. That sounds like I'm saying like people want to hear themselves speak, and that's not actually what I mean. I mean that to give voice to the concerns, the questions, the uncertainties, gives them space and room and honors them as having truth in them. And what I often do as somebody leading a Q&A is I say why we made the choices we made, but I'm often careful not to tell them what it means, because people sometimes want to know what a moment means, right? And instead, I often answer it by saying, here's why we made the choices we made. What it means is actually up to you. And that's also part of the productive discomfort of people have to sit and go, what does it mean to me? How do I feel about what I saw? Where is it sitting in me? But I think the Q&A is that turn process. It is that process of unfolding that people have the truth revealed to themselves and by the other voices in the room. And I'm kind of a facilitator of that more than anything else.
So I talked about this a little bit earlier, and I don't know if you want to take this opportunity to go directly into some of the new work that is brewing, or if we want to talk about it more in sort of a big picture still. But knowing that your work takes 1 to 3 years as it is workshopped in this communal ensemble experience, how do you figure out where like the zeitgeist is going to be 3 years down the road? Like, what are you looking for? Like, how do you know?
Yeah. I would say this isn't a dismissal of your question. This is a way of saying, I don't think I'm interested in where the zeitgeist is going to be in 3 years, because I just don't know. And I'm not a fortune teller. And if I try to be, I'm probably going to be making art that is trying to answer a question I don't yet have. I think instead, how I would approach it is to say, we are choosing topics that are dealing with questions that are very present. And the truth is, those questions often get a lot hotter before they get colder, or before they get answered, or before they get resolved in some way. So I'll give you an example. Before the pandemic, we were going to be doing a piece that got canceled because of the pandemic called Breaking Protocols. You want to talk about provocation? It was our exploration of the notorious anti-Semitic fraudulent text, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. And we were treating it like a vaudeville. So our presentation of the protocols was had comic moments, had a striptease, had a puppet show, right? Because vaudevilles were variety shows. And that was dealing with this bubbling question of why do we, when the world is uncertain or seems to be falling apart, why do we seek for order? And that order we seek for, we call blame, and we pin it on certain people. And at the time, I was actually inspired by the ways in which certain people were talking about the migrant caravan and sort of saying it was infused with terrorists, and kind of it had a conspiratorial aspect to it that I found deeply uncomfortable, that made me think of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion and the way in which, oh, there's a plan. It can't just be that the world is chaotic. There's a plan, and there's a comfort in naming that plan. That piece, we're not doing it, and I think a lot of those themes wound up showing up in Merchant. But the questions we were dealing with only got hotter over the last 3-4 years, only got clearer, only became more clearly about Jewish people and about that history. We've seen more people are unfortunately familiar with what the Protocols of the Elders of Zion is now, because those things have become more clear since 2019. So I think that's a way of answering. We are saying, what is the thing that's making us uncomfortable? What's the thing we are noticing in society that we want to ask about? And then we look for the Jewish entry point to that question.
So expanding on that, and maybe going back to a bit of what you were talking about earlier, you mentioned you had to do some work yourself, right? Thinking through how you were creating the work that you do. And, at one point, maybe you felt comfortable as a diaspora Jew. You have now experienced more and more rising discomfort, as I'm sure many of us who are here today on this call have also experienced, to also the point that you're just making about everything becoming hotter. I mean, the world is a really complicated and difficult place. And frankly, and you and I had talked about this when we were preparing for this call, or this conversation, I should say, sorry. It is hard to be doing Jewish and named Jewish work, especially in the art world right now. It is by and large, whether one sees themselves as an advocate or not, or sees themselves as a cultural ambassador. There's so many soft and more hard ways we could name the work we do in this world. But right now, doing Jewish work in the art world, and it, I believe, should not be this way, but it is a complicated space to inhabit. And so,
yes.
What is the work you've had to do? What does that ongoing work look like? Has your full company needed to do work?
So I think that part of it is because we engage in so many different places in the country and throughout North America. Some of it is just when you're in that many places. I mean, in the last 2 years alone, in addition to our workshop work, which was in 15 or 20 states, we had week-long residencies in 7 regions throughout the country. We're going to more coming up. We're actually going to Canada in November. And I think some of it's just that heightened sensitivity to what are people responding to? How are they feeling? Noticing where there's discomfort where maybe there wouldn't have once been, noticing where, places that used to present us that didn't give a thought to it are now saying, should we do this? Or saying, let's make sure we have security here, when they might not have even considered that before, right? So I think those things are there. I think that what I am careful about, though, is that our job, not all artists again, is to provoke productive discomfort and to ask difficult questions. And so that means sometimes people will be put in a space going, I wish you weren't asking this question right now in this way. And I need to be able to have crocodile skin and our team does, to go, I hear you're upset. I hear you're holding that. We are presenting you with art, and art is complicated, and art can be difficult, and art doesn't have one meaning, it often has many, right? So I think that is important. That being said, I'm going to go back to the protocols piece because I think it speaks to this. We did some online presentations of it and one or two in-process presentations in person through the pandemic when things started to come back and we weren't yet ready to present a full show. And I suddenly realized in conversation with the cast that there were moments that were satirizing the wrong thing. That in other words, we were meaning to satirize the anti-Semites. But when you do satire, there's a fine line where sometimes if you say something in the wrong way, you actually wind up satirizing the very thing you're trying to protect, or you're trying to, right? So we had to make different choices where it suddenly was like, oh, are we actually satirizing Jewish experience here? That's not my intention. And luckily we caught it. But I don't know that we would have even had that dialogue before a few years ago, right? And so the work is just real honesty and also allowing in voices. I remember there was somebody who joined us for the first time for one of those presentations who is a Jewish artist who said to me, I'm concerned about this moment. My job as an artist is to go, why are you concerned? Let's talk about it. I want to understand, not to be defensive. I think artists, myself included, could sometimes be defensive of the art, say, you just don't get it. That's on you. Sometimes that's true, but sometimes it's actually that there's a concern because I may have missed the mark. In the spirit of our tradition, I may have missed the mark. It's not a sin, but I may have missed the mark, you know? And so I need to go back in. And so, you know, I think that's where we're at. So for example, our next piece, because you asked about future work, the next piece that won't open until September 2025, so mark your calendars, is we are changing the dynamic. Instead of doing work that comes from a notably Jewish source or has an overt Jewish connection, we're taking something people don't think of as Jewish and asking questions about how it might be infused with the anti-Semitism and anti-immigrant sentiments of its time. So our next work is Dracula Annotated. And for those who don't know the scholarship around Dracula, there's been a lot of scholarship around how it potentially is a vessel, whether purposeful or not, for the anti-Semitic tropes that were present in English society leading into the late 19th century. And of course, if you think about it, right, Dracula is an Eastern European foreigner who's sucking the lifeblood of the British middle class, who's hoarding gold and is resistant to crucifixes. When I simplify it that way, it sounds obvious, but actually it's a lot more complicated than that. But I'm bringing that up because I think that where our sensitivity is I actually want to be asking the question of where is there anti-Semitism? Where are we hearing it, but it may or may not be there? Where is it, but the creator of it's not aware it's there, so we have to be empathetic and try and work. Like, I'm actually going to be asking some provocative questions rather than saying this is this. And part of the way we go through a process to do that is have honest conversations and also bring in scholars who know more than me and know more than our team, who actually understand the history and can teach us, because otherwise we're going to be coming to it with just our own opinions. And opinions, everyone has one.
Right. That's like an interesting thing, I think, to dig deeper into. Who are the scholars that you are working with, right? Are these folks that are coming in and explaining European history, European Jewish history? Are they looking at, I know there is scholarship around vampires in general as an anti-Semitic trope. Similarly, there's scholarship around witches being characters of the Jewish woman, like the wearing the babushka and the large nose and the drawings, right? And that they're problematic women who, you know, things I do not subscribe to myself, but I know there is scholarship around both of these things, right? And we haven't really named it, and you do name this in The Merchant of Venice, right? But the blood libels, right? That there is a lot that could be at play happening in these tropes at that time.
So, for example, we are working with scholars such, you know, one scholar who wrote a whole book on anti-Semitism in British Gothic literature, who specifically, that's her area. Another scholar whose specialty is Victorian England, to just help us make sure we're getting that right. Another scholar who actually his history is on 16th, 17th century European Jewish theater, which intersects with how Jews are regarded in society. So going back before Victorian times, but to help us understand the trajectory, right? So those are the scholars we're mostly engaging with. I think where there's maybe a gap is a lot of that is about scholarship helping us understand the moment we're talking about. There's probably room to bring in a sociologist or somebody who could help us see this moment, right? Because we're all in this moment. And I think that's maybe a gap in our process that I need to look at. But in terms of the experts we're bringing in, they're often content experts on the time or the subject matter that we are directly engaging with. And they consult in a variety of ways. They give us lectures. They actually look at the script and development. They do some light fact checking, to kind of make sure that what we're sharing is accurate. It's really helpful. Connected to that, Anne, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, of course.
Excellent.
The conversation, my friend.
So as somebody who is a curator who leads an arts endeavor that is about bringing people in, I'm going to ask you the same question, which is that you've asked me how we're engaging in this moment and the difficulties and challenges and what we're noticing. What are you noticing? What are you grappling with as somebody who is, your area is working with artists and making sure they're serving your community. So I'd love to hear a little more from you about that.
Sure. In the work that I do for the Jewish Community Foundation of Orange County through Weizmann Arts, similarly to you, I mentioned this for everybody who's joining us today a little bit right as I started, that Aaron and I go back some time, not just in my role in Orange County currently, because I've only been in this role and working and living in Orange County for about 2 years now. But previous to that, I was working in the Jewish arts sector in Los Angeles for over 20 years. And that's really where Aaron and I's paths first crossed and had the opportunity to do various projects at various times together, as well as just sort of keep tabs on each other's work and career. And I would say with both thinking about the work that I did in LA, what I'm doing now in Orange County, I would echo, honestly, Aaron, much of what you've said, right? Thinking about, sadly, things like security in a really deep and intense way that I wouldn't have necessarily needed to do with projects several years ago. That doesn't mean I haven't done work that I needed to ask those same level of questions around, but it was topic and project specific, and now it just seems as though it is more broad. That if you were culturally doing anything Jewish right now, that needs to be something that is planned for and thoughtfully navigated in a way that wasn't true a few years ago. I would also say, and you are aware of this, I have also been working with the Council of American Jewish Museums for the last few years, helping to produce conferences for them, and had the privilege in this last year of being able to work alongside their executive director, Melissa Yaverbaum, and other senior leadership and team members to help produce a toolkit that went along with a 2-day summit that happened in Washington, D.C. as part of the White House's engagement strategy to combat anti-Semitism. So conversations, and it was specifically looking at what are museums, libraries, and archives doing to combat anti-Semitism today. So even prior to 10/7, I have been entrenched in conversations around Jewish culture in North America and what we are doing to combat anti-Semitism, just broadly as sort of field research, field study, and seeing sadly how there has been such an uptick in anti-Semitism truly in the last few years, having a longer arm going back. And so, yeah, I think thinking about, I guess taking one step back to answer that question as well, that's like the big answer. And the personal answer is I am interested in conversations around healing and solidarity work now in a different way than I think, sort of echoing a little bit of what you had shared earlier, right? Like as someone who grew up in the South, which I believe Sherelle mentioned as part of my bio, I've never felt totally comfortable as a Jew in the diaspora. That's just not, sadly, my story. What might have brought me to solidarity work 3 years ago is a different motivating factor today that brings me to solidarity work. and feeling like, wow, there's a lot more work that actually needs to be done to allow Jewish voices to truly come to the table and be seen. And I am growingly interested in how art and culture can be a vehicle or an opportunity for work around solidarity, healing, and building bridges, bringing people together.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I think one of the things as you were sharing that occurred to me, I think for me, the call on art is seed planting, right? That when people are looking for art to solve the thing right now, that tends to be not how art operates. It is part of a whole group of things, other artworks, other ways of engaging that helps to sort of shift mind and shift heart. But it takes time. And it also means that I may never see the fruits of the seeds I plant fully, right? And there is a deep acceptance of that. So when you talk about building bridges and solidarity, there's an understanding of the measurables of what that means and how that changes people may not be present. And there is a certain amount of needing to surrender to that understanding. I think about at one of the residencies we did, I'll tell a little anecdote connected to this, a Jewish music teacher at a high school in one of the cities we were in contacted and said, is this show appropriate for high school? And I said, yes, younger, not so much. High school and up, we're good. And he said, I teach at a school that has almost no Jewish students, and I want them to come and see the show and think about these things. Brought 50 high schoolers who had a pre-show talk with me, stayed for a 3-hour dense, intellectual, esoteric piece of theater, and then wanted to stay for the talk back and keep going. They were actually sort of disappointed when the teacher was like, I think we have to go, no. And I'm sharing that not to uphold our work, to say, I don't know what seeds that planted. I don't know what new understanding of what it is to be Jewish in the world it provided, but I do know that they were there and they're part of a next generation. And maybe therefore we're part of a great conversation that helps to move things forward. And I think building bridges is about needing to understand that we actually don't know what the outcomes will be, but we have to take the next right action. And that next right action means having conversations that include a lot of people and may actually sometimes get uncomfortable too, because somebody may have a lack of knowledge or may come with a perspective that challenges our own. And how do we hold space for that within the artistic conversation? So I appreciate you bringing that up. Thanks.
Yeah. So I would say, I know we're coming to about 10 minutes out almost. And I know that Sherelle wants to open it up for additional Q&A. Before we jump to that, just is there any other, before we see what everyone else's questions are, anything else that's kind of percolating in your mind that we did not cover from either our pre-conversation or now that you want to share?
Sure, I will share. This is partially just letting you know something else Theater Dybbuk is doing, and also, something that might appeal, especially the folks on this Zoom. We have a podcast I mentioned in passing, but I'll say it more fully, called the Dybbukcast, DYBBUKAST, that combines performed readings of creative Jewish texts or texts related to Jewish community with interviews with scholars, where the scholars use discussing the texts to talk about the history surrounding them. And it is, I'm not just saying this because we produce it, it is worth checking out if you are interested in Jewish history and if you are interested in the complexities of our world. And it's pretty entertaining too, that you hear these lively readings combined with some deep scholarship about what's happening in the circumstances surrounding those texts. So I think that is worth checking out, and it's in deep dialogue with our work. So I'll share about that, and maybe I'll see you in one of your cities in the coming years. So that's what I would have to offer. Anne, do you want to share anything before we open it up?
Yes, very quickly. Our next big project that we're working on in Orange County. And I mentioned I'm from the South, so I say y'all and all y'all a lot. So for all y'all that might live in Orange County or close enough that you could come on down, we are working on a wonderful and powerful Sukkot project that I believe Sherelle can drop a link that I just sent her into the chat for everybody. I would deeply appreciate that. So then I can do that too. Okay. It is going to be, we have invited multiple architect teams who are creating contemporary renderings of Sukkot structures that will be at the Ecology Center. If you are unfamiliar with it, it is a 28-acre regenerative organic farm. And we will have various programs, but the most important one, and that's what the link is in the chat, is for an all-day festival on Sunday, October 20th, which we're going to have pickling demos and main stage conversations and programming for kids. So bring your kids, bring your grandkids, bring everybody. It's going to be a really wonderful from 10 to 4 p.m. all-day event. You can see more on the Ecology website. Tickets are already open and available. And so we'll have kosher food options. It's really an inclusive experience for everybody. And if you like Sukkot, foodie stuff, Jewish foodie stuff, if you like farming, environment, this is the activity that is bringing all of those together. So come and check it out.
Thanks.
So thank you, and thank you, Aaron. I'm just going to jump directly into questions so that we get as many of them in as possible. So Aaron, you mentioned you don't know where the seeds will land and what will be planted, but can you maybe take us to your own past and say what were the seeds that you can recognize in your own journey that brought you to what you're doing today?
Yes, thank you for asking. I'll just say, briefly, longtime theater artist. I was having a theater career, and I started recognizing that I was getting some ideas. I was in my early 30s, and I started recognizing that I was getting ideas connected to Jewish history that I wanted to create theater around. And I was having a career as a playwright and director and such. And I frankly looked at LA, which has the second largest Jewish population in America, and I went, oh, while there's some great work, there isn't this particular brand of work. I mean, you saw from the photos, particular take on how to create theater and how it speaks. And I thought, oh, maybe if I want that, others do as well. So that's a little how the origin of the company. I thought I was just starting a theater company. I didn't know we were going to become this holistic arts and education organization that evolved over time, So I grew up until I was about 15 in Bayonne, New Jersey. So for those who, if anyone's here from Jersey, excellent. And then came to California. And I grew up in a Jewish household in the conservative movement, kind of was living that life. In my early 20s, I come from actually seven generations of rabbis in Ukraine before my great-grandfather came to America and started a dairy and egg business called Sam Henne and Sons. I just, so that was there, that was pulsing underneath. And I think that, and then frankly, in my 20s, I largely went away from Jewish experience at all. It's really interesting. I think I kind of felt like I needed to find my way that was just about being a theater artist and that was sort of devoid of my cultural experience, which is interesting and imperfect and odd and all these things that I needed to do in order to kind of find my voice. But then once I understood what my voice was, I could come back to what was at core operating underneath for me. So that's just a brief little bit about my own origin story.
And you mentioned a few stories and anecdotes about how audience receive your plays, but building on what you just mentioned, how do you find your work is received within the theatrical world? And if you can also mention some maybe other ensembles or artists that are for you, you'd name as your colleagues or your inspiration or your crowd.
Right. So I think what you'll note is we're a theater, but we don't often in America, people think of as theater as being a place or having like a multi-show season. That's just not what we do. It's not how we operate. And so, we are regarded well by those in the theater world for whom this kind of work resonates or who know about us. But I will say where we're unusual is we, I think, have largely operated often outside of the organized theatrical structure and have engaged in community in different ways. And I think that's part of the challenge, but it's also part of our power is that we're reaching people who might not otherwise be engaging in this kind of theater. So that's really interesting. I think that where we reach people is through direct engagement with collaborating with organizations, often not theatrical organizations. So again, diverse audience. In terms of other companies, I'll name some artists and companies. I think that, one of my favorite theatrical artists ever is Robert Wilson, who has created large-scale, challenging work. Some of you may be familiar with, maybe his most famous work is Einstein on the Beach, which was him and Philip Glass and Lucinda Childs' big, multidisciplinary, 4.5-hour, no intermission, crazy, amazing, difficult. There's a company called City Company, SITI, out of New York, that does kind of ensemble-based work. Actually, after 30 years, they've sunsetted, but they are one of the main companies. There's a local company here in LA called Critical Mass that does some really interesting, collaborative, highly theatrical work. Out of New York, there's a famous company called Wooster Group that aesthetically I don't always jive with, but I admire how singular they are. And they create work that is exactly what it is. And it's a love it or hate it proposition, but for those who love it, they understand its experiment and are up for it. So those are just a few I would name.
Another question here is slightly more specific, and it's about your workshops. Are they based on the specific play you're doing, or do you do workshops that are more general, using theater to engage with specific questions? Can you say a bit about that?
Yeah, they are in general more general. So what I would say is that we are brought into communities in a variety of ways. One is we do artist workshops that are called Heritage, History, and Humanity, which is how do you dive into your own heritage and history to create artistic work. So they are not topic specific, they are theme specific, right? So there's that. We do workshops for Jewish educators, actually, who work with kids on how to use storytelling and theatrical techniques in the classroom. We're probably not talking about The Merchant of Venice annotated or Dracula with them. We're just helping to help them think about how to work with students. We also, and this is the other side of what we do, because we have this expertise in creating community and helping people to process things together, we actually are brought into a variety of Jewish nonprofits to train their leaders on how to effectively tell the story of your organization, how to collaborate across difference. Those are very much just about being of service to our Jewish communities. They are not specific to being artistic, but they are infused with artistic principles. Yeah.
Aaron, do you want to share a little bit about One Community, Many Voices? And I might be messing up the name.
That's okay, close. One Community, Many Stories is an event we also do in communities, where we do an event where, in collaboration with an organization, we have community members write their own personal narratives connected to a theme. And that theme is often determined, as I indicated, in collaboration with an organization. We then collect those stories, and an hour to an hour and a half later, we do a performed reading by our team of actors of some of the stories that were just written in the room. And they are read anonymously. And the point of this is to help a community hear what's on the minds of the others in their community, but without needing to expose anybody, right? They don't know if the person whose story they're hearing is sitting next to them. So that's another way we work with communities, and we did that in Orange County, and it was really lovely.
Another more specific question is about costing. Are your plays always written for the number of your people in the ensemble, or do you then recruit more people for a specific play? And if so, how do you look at diversity and who you're bringing in, especially if they're coming in at a later stage of a process, which you describe as so rigorous and long?
Right. We cast before a word is written, and the play is therefore written for the people who are in the process. And what that means is that, for example, our next work, Dracula Annotated, is a cast of 5. They're all involved already. We usually try every show or every other show, though, to bring somebody new in. Partially, that's how an ensemble grows, right? It's not just the folks who are already in the ensemble. You also start to expand. So that's the way that works. We've had occasion where suddenly you do realize, oh, I think we need somebody else, and then you figure that out. But for the most part, we are building for the people in it. What I would say simply is that we are interested in, we live in Los Angeles, travel the country, travel the world. We are interested in creating work that reflects what our own city and world looks like. And so there is an eye on that in casting, with also an understanding of where do we make sure Jewish representation and voices are present in that? How do we balance the needs of the content with the needs to represent our world, right? All that is present, but we do have an eye on it because we feel a responsibility to kind of say, we're talking about our world. This piece should look and feel like our world. So that's my quick answer to that on one foot.
That's beautiful. Thank you. I'm going to close with a anecdote question. If you can kind of lean aside so we can see the art behind you, and if you can say a word about what that is. I literally received that question, and I think it's sweet to kind of know.
Oh, that's great. I absolutely will. So this is from a board member who gifted me with it, which is lovely. This is from a 1960s production of the Dybbuk that I think was in Poland. And he got it from somebody's collection and gifted it to me. So that's what this is. I do love, there's always a little mystery. I present a lot online and I'll slightly move. So people are like, what is that behind you? So I'm glad somebody asked. I will share. I don't often show this when I'm teaching because it's a little dark. It's the Dybbuk, right? So if I scroll up my camera, what looks like a finger walking, you will notice a little hard because my ring camera's up there. It's actually a tombstone with hair. You can barely see it. And there's kind of some flame work. But so that's what it is. And I keep it here as a reminder of, even while I'm doing these sort of friendly workshops, there's something behind me that's mysterious and pulsing through them. So thank you for asking. I'm glad whoever asked.
So thank you very, very much. Thank you, Anne, for just introducing matchmaking. I know the Orange County community extremely enjoyed you, and I'm happy that we had the opportunity to enjoy you, even for those of us that aren't privileged to see you live. As usual, you'll receive the follow-up email with the recording, as well as a lot of supplementary material from what Aaron and Anne talked about, and all the links. So thank you very, very much. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you, Sherelle. Thank you, CSP.
Thanks, Sherelle.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Anne.
everyone. להתראות. See you.